I think what we'll do is we'll get going. We've got a quorum present, and hopefully Paul will be able to join us here shortly. So let me call the meeting to order. In accordance with the requirements of open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over Lunenburg Public Access. The town of Lunenburg, in response to the COVID-19 coronavirus, is currently following the guidance from the Lunenburg Board of Health, Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and the CDC regarding the virus and steps communities can take to prevent the spread, and all town facilities are open by appointment only, outside the open hours of 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. In accordance with the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, general law, chapter 30A, section 20, all public meetings are being conducted remotely. This meeting will be broadcast live through local access cable, on Facebook Live, on the Public Access Facebook page, and will be able to be found on the Lunenburg Access YouTube channel within 24 hours after the meeting. The following information is also provided for members of the public who like to participate in the meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, please use the link below to join the public meeting webinar, https://us02web.zoom.us/879-837. Admit Paula. Sorry, 879-837-48196 from a telephone. Dial the toll-free number 888-475-4499 and enter meeting ID 879-837-48196. If you have not registered with Zoom, you will be asked for your name and email address. Note, no participant ID is needed. Just press pound when asked. Telephone users may dial *9 to request to speak after joining the meeting. Computer and app users may use the raise hand function or feature to request to speak. Does anybody have any questions? All right, with that, I will note that I see members Karen Menard, Paula Bertram, Bob Pease, Lynn Mann, and Mike Toohill present. Did I miss anybody? Great. I'd like to start the meeting by reviewing and approving the minutes from October 13th meeting. Thanks, Paula, for providing those. Does anybody have any comments, questions, or would like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve. I would note that I consider the work on the gate at Table Rock to be more for the Conservation Commission, but the minutes are fine the way they are, so I move we approve.
I'll second it.
Thank you. All votes by roll call. Is there any further discussion before we do so? Hearing none. Karen?
Yes.
Paula?
Aye.
Lynn?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Bob?
Aye.
And I for myself. Thank you. I would like to now introduce Al Futterman, who I will unmute. Al is with Nashua River Watershed Association, and he reached out to me to express interest in talking with our committee about the Forest Legacy project and program. Al, I'm going to also ask you to start your video if you would. And an application to the Forest Legacy program that NRWA is entertaining for the upcoming round. So with that, I'm going to hand the floor over to Al so that he can have an opportunity to more fully introduce himself and the program.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. I would like to turn on my video, but I have such poor internet connection that you'll lose me. So you'll
No
have
problem.
to just bear with the black screen there. Indeed, as Land Programs and Outreach Director at the NRWA, I did approach Brandon for this opportunity tonight. And hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. It's actually the Wild and Scenic River Stewardship Council that is taking this on as a project. Though, of course, the NRWA will be very involved with my involvement as staff, and will probably, should this come to pass, be the lead on the application. It, again, is a Nashua, Squanicook, and Nissitissit Wild and Scenic River Stewardship Council project. So let me get that out of the way. I seem to recall that it was several years ago that I came before you guys and the Concom as well to pitch a previous Forest Legacy application. And that is to say that we've been successful in at least two of our previous Forest Legacy applications, which secured over 3,000 acres. And I think it was something like $5.9 million that we leveraged, brought in through this federal Forest Legacy program. It's a 75%, 25% cost share program, which means with the bottom line, we have to come up with 25% match. That's done usually with gifts of land or bargain sales by landowners. Because this is a national program, we have to be competitive at the national level. And that means putting a lot of landowners together for an aggregation. So I just use 1,000 acres as a minimum threshold. Ideally, I'd like to get to 2,000 if possible. The geographic area is, again, that newly designated Wild and Scenic River core towns. There are 11 of them, and Lunenburg is not one of them, but because it has tributaries to the Nashua, I think it's very important to include you guys and would love to have you on board, as is Ashby, which has tributaries to the Squanicook. It's not in those core Wild and Scenic towns. Same with Mason, New Hampshire. But for whatever it's worth, the 11 towns that are in Wild and Scenic are Lancaster, Bolton, Harvard, Ayer, Shirley, Groton, Townsend, Pepperell, Dunstable, and then Brookline and Hollis in New Hampshire. At any point, slow me down or ask questions. Otherwise, I'll just proceed for perhaps another 2 minutes. You have to unmute.
You're right. If you wouldn't mind giving a quick overview of the Forest Legacy program, so everybody understands what Forest Legacy means and how it's implemented.
Sure. Of course, given its name, its focus is on forested lands. It also has 3 criteria, which are threatened. Therefore, any land that's already protected, say Article 97 or in the care and custody of the Concom, can't be included. The second criteria is its importance, say from a natural resource perspective. Is it buffering a water body? Is it providing clean water? Is it providing recreation, public access, which is sort of mandated generally? And the third criteria is its strategic value, which is, does it abut existing lands? Does it provide a corridor? Is it written into your town open space plan or a regional open space plan? Perhaps it's somehow mentioned in the state wildlife action plan. So those are the 3 categories. There used to be a category called readiness, which is just how ready is the landowner to move forward. It is a program that could be in fee, simple, or conservation restriction. And there's a model forest legacy program conservation restriction that would be shared if a landowner wants to go that route. And the CR has to be held by a governmental entity. That can be a town, the state, it could be the feds. For example, if there was a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers property, but we don't have that. There is the Oxbow National Wildlife Refuge in Harvard and Devons. But by and large, it's going to be the town or the state. And since there isn't much DCR land in Lunenburg, if any, we're talking about Fish and Wildlife, Department of Fish and Wildlife, as the entity that's eligible to hold a forest legacy restriction. I'll pause there. You'll have to unmute.
You think I do this all day long for work? I wouldn't have this issue. To summarize then, this is a funding source, that federal funding source for land conservation projects in town that meet some baseline criteria, and what the applicant tends to try to do in New England in particular, but particularly Southern New England, is we in Southern New England have been successful putting together these aggregation projects where you put together a whole bunch of smaller conservation. It's hard for us to find a single 1,000-acre conservation project anywhere in Massachusetts, but we can find a whole grouping of landowners who are held together around a theme. So this is a theme of the Wild and Scenic River.
Correct.
For Nashua. And the resource protection around that. We can hang various projects around that theme and aggregate them so that they can together be considered a cohesive project that we can then take forward to the federal level and seek funding for. So like we did for the Saliba property, where we sought state funding for acquisition, this project potentially provides a federal funding source for conservation dollars that would allow us to target and protect certain key properties in town that we think would be good fits for a forest legacy, forest conservation project. Al, take a second and talk about the timing of the project as well. I imagine that some people may have questions about that.
And I think I should mention that there's $20 million available this year. That's $20 million available for any one project. And that's up from about 6 or 7 million in all years past. So this is the year to go for it. And there also were no applications in Massachusetts last year. I don't think there'll be pent up interest, but we certainly should try to get in on that. I would also, before going on to timing, as you requested, Brandon, mention that with Forest Legacy, the parcel has to be 25%, no more than 25% non-forested. So hayfields, swamp, marsh, open water, can't be more than 25% of a parcel. The timing is different than the state, where the state has its budget, has to be spent within that fiscal year. In this case, it's going to be 2 to 3 years out. So we would submit an application in mid-July, and we might know by February, that would be 2022. And at that point, then it has to go through the congressional and the president's budget, and that takes forever. So even though it's supposed to be in October, it generally doesn't happen for several months thereafter. At the point that we have been awarded the grant, then we can move forward, and we have 2 to 5 years to close. So it's a landowner who's not going anywhere and can hang in there. If it's a landowner has to sell, there may be a conservation buyer or another entity that can step in and hold on to the property and put it into forest legacy, and we succeed several years out. So that's the timing. When one thing there are several requirements. For example, there's a mandatory forest stewardship plan, just as you would for Chapter 61. There's also other requirements, like it has to be a yellow book appraisal as opposed to a less rigorous appraisal. Yeah, let me stop there.
And can the forest legacy funds be used to cover some of those transactional costs, like the appraisal costs and those other types of transactional costs?
Very much so, with the proviso that it's only after the award has been made, nothing prior to that. And yes, legal costs and baseline report, which is a mandatory thing, survey costs and the yellow book appraisals, that and the review appraisal, they can all be reimbursed. There is a requirement for a landowner to sign like a 1 or 2 sentence acknowledgement and willingness to participate letter. So we have to have that in hand when we submit mid-July. But otherwise, as you might imagine, it's a voluntary willing buyer, willing seller standard deal.
Great, thank you, Al.
Yeah, what I would be looking for from you guys, and this is pretty much it for me, is I need a point of contact, a single individual who I can stay in touch with. Ideally, I'm imagining that you guys already have lists of, all the parcels in town that are more than 50 acres and that are unencumbered, your priority lists. And pretty soon it would be time to kind of reach out to landowners and see if they have interest, because I just don't want this to drag on too long. At some point, I want to make a decision about whether we're going to proceed or not. I do think that any work that's done, even if we don't actually go ahead and pull the trigger and submit an application, is work well done, because it's always good to reach out to landowners and say something's available and gauge their interest.
So thank you for that, Al. Does anybody have any specific questions for Al at this moment?
Lynn, unmute, please.
Sorry. Hi, Al.
Hi.
How are you?
Well.
I'm wondering if either there's a link on the USDA forestry page where we can read about the program further, or if we could get a copy of not the proposal, but the RFP or the request for proposals. There was a lot of information presented just now, and I don't retain that well. So I was just wondering if there was something I could read.
Yeah, but of course. So there isn't a good federal website. I don't find it helpful. So I will provide Brandon, who can share with you all about 4 or 5 pieces that will go a long way to explaining things further. But there was a second piece to what you said. Maybe you could just remind me again what else?
No, I was just wanting to know if there was some information we could read, because I'm not going to retain this conversation in my head all that well. And plus there would probably be some details maybe that would be in written material that weren't discussed. And so I would just, if there was a link on the website, or whether we could see the request for.
Oh yeah, that was it. There is no request for proposal out yet. It probably will be several months before they get around to sending that. That's what I wanted to say.
Oh, okay.
Is there an older RFP from maybe the last grant round that we could share? Because my assumption is that much of the same material will hold true.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm sure I could bring something like that up. I'm not sure quite how detailed that is. It's that could be pretty vague and general, but the materials that I do send you should answer all the questions you have. And then of course, I'm a resource that you can turn to at any point.
Fabulous. Thank you.
You
And
welcome.
Al, is there a minimum size parcel? You mentioned 50 acres, but was that just an arbitrary number you're pulling out of the air? Or is
It was absolutely arbitrary. We've definitely included way smaller parcels, but the effort, the due diligence money that you're going to spend on a small parcel is the same as a very large parcel. So just to save us all a lot of sweat and pain, because this is a bear of a program, I'll let you know, it's the state land grants are a piece of cake compared to Forest Legacy. So we want to make it worthwhile, but as long as we can claim that it's threatened, important, and strategic, we're good to go.
And then I guess the last question I had was had to do with the match piece. Later on our agenda tonight, we have a discussion regarding general municipal owned properties. And one of the ideas we have for some of those general municipal properties is to commit those properties to the care and control of the Conservation Commission for the properties that are appropriate to do that. Would such a dedication from general municipal to permanent protection under the care and control of the Conservation Commission, could that be leveraged as a match for other conservation projects that we might want to fund in town?
I'm with you totally. I know I've said to you, and I've said to a lot of other people that I absolutely think that's the case, but I'm getting some pushback on that. So I know it has been done at least once in Massachusetts and Petersham. The program coordinator at State DCR, Lindsay Nystrom, who runs the program, she's a little ambivalent about it. So we're still pursuing that. It's much more clear when a land trust itself has unencumbered parcels. That we know for sure works. So I'm with you on the sentiment, and I'll let you know if it actually is going to be feasible. I'm thinking so.
Okay, that's great to know. So, I mean, for the committee's sake, I would say, you know, this is an interesting opportunity, but as Al points out, the Forest Legacy program is challenging,
Owners,
yeah, onerous, and has a duration to it. There's a timeline here. So the landowners with whom we might consider approaching about this, we'd have to be very clear, you know, particularly about the timeline. You know, often when you knock on somebody's door and they express an interest in conservation, now all of a sudden they start thinking a certain way about their property, and they start thinking, and things become a lot more accelerated than they may have otherwise before you knocked on their door. So it's important for us to think about that as well in terms of the landowners who we may decide to approach with this. It seems to me the first place we could look are landowners who are currently enrolled in the Chapter 61 program.
absolutely.
And we don't have many of those in town. That list is relatively short, but several of those, just thinking off the top of my head, may make very good candidates for this program. We have other properties that may be enrolled in Chapter 61B that would be good candidates for this program. And then otherwise, you know, large landowners who have not yet expressed an interest in determining the future of their property that may be a good candidate, you know, meeting the other criteria that Al described. So I would say the first step, if this is something the committee is interested in doing, is we should probably look at our priorities and our resource lists and think there's probably a relatively short list of landowners who we'd want to potentially contact and explore this interest with. And Al, would you have availability to join us on any of those visits if that came to pass?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, it's a good fit for those who it's a good fit. I've been through this several times, and it's there are landowners who they want a conservation outcome. They're not going anywhere. They're so happy that you approached them. I hope that's the case in Lunenburg.
Great. Anybody else have any other questions for Al?
Brandon, this is Mike. I have a quick question for both of you. Al, you said that parts of Lunenburg, I think you said parts of Lunenburg are part of this corridor because of the watershed boundaries. So do you have mapping that shows what parts of the town are included within consideration of which parts are not? Because if we're going to be approaching property owners, we want to make sure that they qualify, quote unquote, qualify because they're in the right part of the watershed.
All of Lunenburg is fine.
All of Lunenburg.
Yes.
Okay.
One thing I was going to mention is that with that much money available, sometimes there's really expensive properties that even a land grant, which has a cap on it, can't touch. And here's an opportunity, for perhaps your most expensive properties to have a funding source that they otherwise wouldn't.
And going back to the resources, to help answer Mike's question, the resources that are identified as the primary interest, that's the kind of analysis I think we'd want to apply to this, to a prioritization effort in terms of who we would potentially target. And I hate that word target.
Yeah, me too.
Who we would potentially reach out to explore their interest in this. Is that especially if we're building the theme around the wild and scenic river, do they actually have any sort of stream frontage or other water features on their property that are direct contributors to the drainage that goes into the natural river. So obviously the entire town is within the watershed. But does a property actually have a stream going through it, or a wetland or something that provides contributing resource value to the watershed? More direct.
That's a spot on comment. Though, given that it's an aggregation of perhaps dozens of landowners, you can kind of fudge and slip in a property that doesn't necessarily contribute toward the theme, just because there's so many. If it's important in some regard, we can make it work.
Right.
Well, I appreciate, I
appreciate you stopping by, Al, and shedding some wisdom on us and giving us an opportunity to think about this. We will keep this on the agenda for the next meeting, and we'll do a little bit of homework around it and see what if we can come up with some good ideas. It may take us a couple of meetings to get back to you. So,
no problem.
Good.
I'm gonna jump over to a Lancaster Town Forest Committee meeting right now and pitch this same program. Then it's dinner. So, Lynn, I might not get around to sending those documents until midday tomorrow.
No hurry.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
good. You guys have a good meeting. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Thanks, Al. See ya. Good. Well, I think the Forest Legacy program is certainly very interesting, and as Al says, it can bring a substantial slug of money into a conservation project. But it can also be a bear of a program to be involved in. So, I think from my perspective, the committee should take a look at the information he sends along and see what kind of projects we may be interested in pursuing. But it's the kind of thing too where it may make sense to have a land grant as a backup. If we have a good conservation project that comes out of any sort of outreach that we do to landowners, that we maybe want to pursue other funding scenarios for those projects as well, depending on the trajectory of the grant application. now, like you said, it can be a multi-year, up to 5-year long process. So, but for the right landowner, one who's patient, it can work out well for them.
Brandon,
Yeah.
who would oversee the project from the town of Lunenburg?
Well, it's a good question. Ultimately, we would have to have a role probably have a role in the final conservation of the property. So an interest in the property, whether that's a conservation easement or actual outright ownership of property, in this case, likely by the Conservation Commission to meet the objectives. But what has typically happened in these types of projects is that the project manager is the applicant. So in this case, the applicant is likely going to be NRWA as the proponent. So we would have their assistance to help kind of pull it all together. I don't know if are you talking about project management, or are you talking about?
No, I would assume it would be I would assume it would be NWRA. Did I say that right? I was thinking more specifically about for the Lunenburg portion of it, and because it's obviously going to be a collaborative type project, for the Lunenburg portion of it, it would seem like there should be like a single point of contact in Lunenburg. And I was just wondering, would that be the Conservation Commission? Like, would it be Bob? Or would it be open space? Would it, I mean, I was just wondering how that would work.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think we'd have to determine who the right person would be to be sort of our point of contact for the project. I think that would be certainly one of the things we'd have to determine. Any other questions on that topic? So I guess I would suggest that folks, we'll get the information out that Al provides and circulate that. We can all do a little bit of more thinking on it. And then, I'd encourage you to take a look at our land inventory work from our open space plan and see, if there was a short list of properties or that you think might make a good fit, and be an opportunity for us to have some conversations with some landowners. I can't imagine this being a list that's more than a handful of prospects, rather than casting a really broad net and overextending ourselves. I would think this is really just a handful of conversations we would have with sort of key landowners who have the resources that kind of match and maybe the patience to go along with it. All right, good. If there's nothing further on that, then I'd say let's move on. Bob, I see you just hid your video. You'd be next on the list for the next agenda item.
And so you're gonna have to just listen, because people are freezing on me, which means that I'm having bandwidth issues. So that's why I shut my video off.
Okay, no problem.
When I first started on the grant, I wanted some way for people to be able to navigate our trails. And initially I thought I'd focus on an application called Trail Forks, because at the time it was free. But in October, they started charging. And so it occurred to me that I might, and like if you go to Groton, Groton uses open street maps as their navigation tool. But I was looking for something that was free. Mr. Mapper, from MRPC is a possibility. But I'm pursuing right now using CAI Access GIS's website because that's our municipal website. And so I want to take and create a trails layer and upload that. And the trails layer would match the trails that appear on the town's trails maps. At the same time, I want to upload a layer I'm proposing, and I want to discuss it with this committee, a layer of town properties. So you can see, which of these trails are on conservation land and which are not. The trails layer, the town properties layer would be a dynamic layer based off of the use code in the assessor's database. We're always, have to go back and look at the open space plan to try and figure out, where are all these town properties. I thought it would be handy if we could take and identify all the town properties, on Access GIS, because that enables you to, cross-reference, in a dynamic way, other sources of information. And so I just wanted, and I'd have to pay for this. You can upload it. If you upload a new layer at the time of that our whole database is uploaded, it's free. If you want to do it at a different time, it costs $250, but I pay for that out of the grant. It's no big deal. But I want to discuss this idea with the Open Space Committee because it kind of dovetails with the Open Space Committee's work, on identifying town properties and looking at, what should happen with them and stuff like that. Which is why I put it on the agenda.
Brandon, you're muted.
Sometimes the space bar works and sometimes it doesn't. Sorry about that. Paula, did you have something?
No, Bob, not about this. Bob, I don't know if you realize you're logged in twice. That might be part of your bandwidth problem.
Okay.
But I did want to say, I know that the Snowmobile Association of Mass is looking at a trail application, and I know the Lunenburg Snow Riders have worked with them on some of the GIS coordinates of various trails. And I didn't know if it might make sense for you to talk to the person who's managing that for us, and I can give her your contact information if that would be okay.
Paula, I've been in regular contact with Mary Wilson.
Oh, that's the person. Okay.
I've been in regular contact with her. We've done a Zoom. We did a Zoom meeting last week. We corresponded actually today because I'm trying to get her input because I want to take and show on our trail maps all the trails that are open to snowmobiles on Lunenburg conservation lands.
Fantastic. I think it's a wonderful idea. I think having all of the trails as a layer would be very helpful to all of the residents of Lunenburg. That's a question that comes up very often.
And I forgot to mention, in their next iteration of their application, CAI is going to take, right now, if you click on show my location, it does it once, and not very well, by the way. It doesn't follow you around, but based on a suggestion I made 2 weeks ago, they're going to take and update it so that if you're using a mobile device, somehow they know whether or not you're using a mobile device, it'll follow you around. So now it becomes a dynamic navigation tool.
That's wonderful.
And the beauty of that is there's no app to download. You can do it from any smart device. So I'll be able to put a QR code on the maps, on the map signs, so people can just do the QR code to bring them right to the CAI website, and they'll be able to, follow themselves, see where they are, on the trail maps.
So Bob, I presume you already know the answer to this. And I'm mostly for my own edification because I have no idea who is the sort of lead owner, if you will, of our relationship with CAI and what kind of controls are there?
It's the
for the type of
assessor.
data?
The lead owner is the assessor. I have not yet talked to the assessor about this. However, Adam Burney has a lot to say about the whole thing. And I've been working with Adam Burney, and my next step after this meeting was I was going to go and talk with the assessor, because actually I want the assessor to update some of the land use codes on the town webpage, on the town, for the town properties, because some of them are not accurate. Like the 2 properties that we just transferred to the care and control of the Conservation Commission last week, and stuff in some of them I don't understand. It says selectmen vacant, and it's not vacant land. It's got the it's got the DPW building on it. So but I was going to wait to talk about that part of it, when we talk about, get to agenda item 7, probably at some future meeting, about the review of town-owned property list.
So personally, I think this is a wonderful idea.
But
And
it's like a good.
Go ahead, Paula.
Okay, I was just going to say, personally, I think that this is a great idea. I would fully support it. I think adding that layer would be a great advantage to people in Lunenburg. I think having the town-owned layer would also be very helpful, just from our work perspective, because I know I was going back and forth between a ton of different maps trying to look at parcels and where they were in relationship to different maps within the open space plan. So I would fully support it. I do have a question about, Bob, you mentioned the $250 out of a grant. What grant were you referring to?
I would use my RTP grant.
Okay, and what
I
was
got that recreational trails program grant.
Okay. And
That grant.
Yes, Bob?
I'm
Dropping
sorry,
off on us.
your audio keeps freezing on me.
Yours does too, Bob, apparently. All right, well, Bob's addressing his audio issues. Paula, you've expressed your support for this program. Does anybody else wish to chime in on that? Yeah, Lynn?
Yeah, in terms of layering, I'm not familiar with this program at all, but I was wondering if it might interact with something like the NHESP GIS systems that have a lot of the geological features, and like vernal pools and potential vernal pools, and I forget what the terminology is they use, but like sensitive areas and stuff like that. It would be really nice to be able to have those as layers as well. Do you know what I don't know if I
made there's through Mass GIS.
Yeah, the biomap 2 stuff.
And many of those can be delivered as what they call web services, so they can be linked directly to these other outlets, if you will.
Yeah, so, that's really cool. They have different habitat areas and stuff like that, which would be really cool to superimpose on top of the trails maps.
My only concern would be that almost too much information may be difficult for people to navigate. It might lose its effectiveness, and that's one of the reasons I'm asking the question about who's the ultimate owner of this, is because I believe it's realistically that website, that online resource is a local assessment resource, right? So you know, it's not really, I mean, there's probably a lot of really interesting uses for it.
Mhm.
But I'm curious to hear what the assessor has to say about it, because, you know, and they may say, look, this has a certain utility to us. And, you know, and if we put too much information in there, and now all of a sudden it's difficult for people, the average user, to use it for what it was intended for.
Okay.
So that's, and I don't know if that's how they'll view it. And that's why I asked the question to Bob, whether or not he's had that conversation. Yeah, Bob, go ahead.
I would note that I worked for 2 years to get the 2-foot contours uploaded onto Access GIS. And I worked through Adam Burney on that. And this assessor was never involved in that process. You know, plant conservation uses those 2-foot contours quite a bit, and I imagine they'd probably be useful to planning too.
So Bob, do you know if the Access GIS could interface with the biomap too?
That's actually on there. You know, that's one of the layers, the state available layers, like Brandon was saying, and it is a layer you can take and activate. But you know, the instructions for this would just be turn on the town properties map and turn on the trails layer and call it a day.
All right.
Well, I don't know if anybody else wants to speak up on, in terms of their support for the project.
Brandon, do you have suggestions? Do you have suggestions? Did you, the land use map in the
The open space
in
plan.
our open space plan?
Mhm.
Thank you. Those colors there, were they keyed to the use codes, or were they keyed to something else?
They were keyed to the definitions that were in the land use summary, and so in those appendices, and then so that, which were all based on the land use codes. So that's probably how I would do it. I'd do it based on the land use codes if I were making those decisions.
Well, when I discussed it with Tim, the guy at the CAI, he said it would be a dynamic layer, you know, based on land use code. So I was just going to try and pick colors that mimicked the colors that you chose for, you know, in the open space plan.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense, and that would add consistency. So when people are looking at it in one place, it looks the same when they look at it in another. I like that idea.
Thank you.
Great. Anyone else want to chime in on this one? Going once, going twice.
Mr. Chairman, I would just comment that you had within our chat, we had a comment from someone from the public. I don't know if you saw it.
Sorry. Nope. Let me look. Thank you. Whatever is done should be compatible with hiking apps. Is there compatibility with all trails and with all that other, you know, with all the other sort of hiking apps that are out there?
Well, all the apps that are out there, I mean, if you take and you look at all trails has almost all of our existing trails in it. And I know I personally worked with the regional ambassador to upload all of our trails into Trailforks. You know, and I haven't checked, you know, but there's probably 4 or 5 other, trail apps. Down the road, I hope to take in, it was actually a suggestion by Chris Menard. I had to make it so you could take and have the GPX or KML tracks available, you know, so people can download them and put them into their GPS. But that's down the road. That's not in the first iteration.
There was
Okay.
a follow-up comment in the chat.
based on open street maps. You started the conversation with open street maps, right?
Well, Chris Menard's been uploading trails into open street maps, and that's what Groton uses. Groton uses open street maps. But open street maps has other limitations. And so, which is why I'm looking to use the CAI Access GIS.
Okay, good. Well, I mean, ultimately, we'll have to, you know, however the Conservation Commission is promoting its trails and disseminating the information about the trails will be, you know, incumbent upon us to make sure that we communicate that. Not every town's going to use necessarily the same technology, so what we use is what we use, and just make sure that people know where to get it. You know, certainly there are plenty of other hiking apps that are sort of user inputted, based on, like, All Trails, I think, is largely user inputted, right, from people who upload trails that they hike.
Yep. Yes.
You know, it's ultimately people are going to go to multiple different sources when they're thinking about going for a walk somewhere. So. All right, good. You're still on, Bob. We're going to move to the discussion about the revision of the Conservation Commission land use policy.
I just wanted to call this group's attention that the Conservation Commission has a public hearing on December 2nd. Well, we're calling it a public hearing. Really, it's a public forum because we don't need to, there's no legal mechanism to hold a hearing. We're going to revise our land use policy. As the draft presently stands now, it would clarify our approach to hunting with firearms. It would allow it would clarify and allow snowmobile use, you know, on trails. It would clarify and allow people to do trail maintenance, you know, without having to seek permission. You know, and set certain rules. And you know, it's the draft is posted on the Conservation Commission website. And I urge people to take a look at it and either send in their comments or participate in the hearing or whatever. And if they have any comments they want to direct right now, I'd be happy to hear them. Although really they should be directed to the entire commission.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, please.
I don't have a question. The meeting will be via Zoom, and is the information already posted on the link for the meeting, or should people just keep looking for that?
It is posted. It was advertised in the Lunenburg Ledger on Friday.
Okay.
And in the Lunenburg Ledger, it said that the draft would be posted on the Conservation Commission website. And I was assured by Adam Burney that that was done. So I assume that it's there. I haven't looked, but I assume it's there.
Yeah,
So anybody can go there
I looked this morning and it
and
was,
download it.
Go ahead, Lynn.
I said I looked this, are you talking about the agenda, Bob, or the land use policy?
The land use
Oh.
policy.
Am I muted?
No, no.
Okay. Are you talking about the agenda or the actual draft of the land use policy?
The draft land use policy.
Oh, okay.
Adam sent me an email saying that he had put it at the bottom of the
It is there.
Conservation Commission page where it says quick links.
Yeah,
And so I have every
that,
confidence that it's there.
I looked this morning and the land use policy is there. What I was looking for, and I don't know if you wait till like 48 hours prior to the date, but I was looking for an agenda on the Conservation Commission.
You're too early.
I'm too early. So it's like 48 hours before the meeting.
No, it'll be posted tomorrow.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
Good, thanks. Anybody else have any further questions for Bob?
Yeah, just a quick question, Brandon. This is Mike. The land use policy that's posted that I just opened up is dated January of 2011.
But if you open it up, you'll see there's track changes in there. That's what
I did, and it doesn't show, I don't think it shows track changes, at least on the click that I did. I just did it.
no, did you look at are you looking at the draft, or both are posted? The current land use policy is posted and the revisions are posted.
Okay, I'll double check. I hit the quick link down the bottom and I thought I opened up the,
It's called Proposed Land Use Policy Updates 2020. It's a separate link.
okay. My mistake, thank you.
Yeah, and that has the track changes. I just opened it.
Got it, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, which is, oh, there it is. Okay.
It's at the top of the quick links, not the bottom of the quick links.
Yeah, okay, great. Yep, it's all there.
Great. Looking forward to reading that, Bob. Thanks. Any other comments on that? All right. Check the chat. Nothing in the chat. All right, great. So we'll move on to item number 6, continuation of the discussion regarding 360 Flat Hill Road, Chapter 61A withdrawal notice, and vote on a recommendation to the select board. I'll give you an update. As we had I had a meeting with the Board of Selectmen a couple weeks ago now. I don't remember the exact date. And gave them an update on our last conversation regarding our interest in 360 Flat Hill Road. Had follow-up conversations with a few other folks in town, including and what I would characterize as an angel donor, somebody who'd be interested in making a sizable charitable contribution to a conservation outcome at the property, which is a significant development. But I have not, unfortunately, been able to make much progress on further conversations with the North County Land Trust or potential agricultural buyers of restricted property there. So I feel like we're at a bit of an impasse in terms of where we are. I think we've got some very good news in terms of interest from a charitable donor, but I don't have a solid anything solid really to report in terms of how else we could pull the project together. We'd still need a sizable amount of the purchase price to come together in a to have a meaningful conservation outcome. So I feel like it's sort of a mixed review in terms of where we're at, and given the timing of things, I'm kind of hard pressed to think that we have a project we can take forward necessarily, given where we are today, where we are in the calendar, and where we are with the sort of remaining time that we have under the right of first refusal. So, Paula, were you raising your hand?
No.
Oh, sorry. I wish I had more to report on it than I do, except to say that I feel like, what I don't want to do is I don't want to string the landowners along any further than we need to, if we don't feel like there's something that's necessarily going to come together in the time frame that we have remaining. And that's really where I'm unfortunately coming to now in my realization in terms of where we're at with the overall being able to piece together the project. So, I mean, we could potentially request a little bit more time, see if we can, take the offer that we have from the the potential donor and leverage that, in a way to allow us to piece this together. But like I said, I'm concerned that we have not much time left in the 120-day period that I think expires here in January, and a whole bunch of busy times between now and then, which may make it very difficult to meet that deadline.
So when you talk about North County Land Trust, I thought you had mentioned that you had some preliminary conversations with them. Have you just not heard back from them, or?
No, I've heard back from them. I have I've been the one that's dropped the ball. I just haven't had the ability to follow up on all of this and with everything else that's going on. So unfortunately, I've been able to make some contacts. Like I said, we made some contacts with North County Land Trust. They certainly expressed their interest in this. I had several conversations with the donor, and that has been very fruitful and extremely generous. But there's a lot of work that remains. There'd still be, $500,000 plus that we would have to pull together from funding sources to put this project together. So if it would be a complicated project, and would still leave an awful lot of work that would have to be done between now, the end of the right of first refusal, and the 90 days we would have thereafter to close. So
my question would be, I mean, obviously we all think this is a really worthwhile project, and I understand that, you haven't had the time, and I'm just wondering, I don't have a lot of experience in this area. I'm certainly willing to help. It sounded like Mike had some experience at the last meeting, and I wonder if this is something that we can assist with, or to try to help facilitate, or if we can kind of delegate some of the responsibilities. I mean, I'm happy to help in whatever way I can. I would hate for us to lose this piece of property. I mean, as we talked about, this is a prime piece of agricultural land in Lunenburg. And I think its protection is incredibly important. So are there things that we can do as a committee that we can delegate, and all of us can take a little bit of it to take some of the pressure off you?
I would love for somebody else to drive the bus, and then I can, continue to advise and provide my, my technical expertise on portions of the project. But in terms of coordinating and advancing the ball on this, clearly I haven't had the chance to do that at this point. Mike, go ahead.
You may have answered this before, Brandon, but has a leaseback been discussed with the property owners?
So the property owners are under agreement, and so they're not in a position to negotiate with us, as they have an agreement with another buyer. So it would be beyond bad form and be breach on their part to negotiate with us. So there's probably lots of different ways, if they weren't under agreement, that we could approach this and try to sort of meet their needs and meet our needs. But the fact that they're under agreement ties their hands, particularly on that.
Not that it matters for this property, but you guys know the history of the town better than I do. The subdivision that's next door to this, was that also, did that come out of 61A at one point?
So I don't know the complete history of that, but I do know that the large bulk acreage that's behind that subdivision is considered, I guess it's homeowner association owned land. I've heard it referred to as conservation land, though I'm not 100% sure that there's a permanent deed restriction on any of that. Looks like Bob may have dropped off the call.
Yeah.
Does anybody else know the status of that?
I don't.
So
Conservation land, I believe it is the association that owns that piece of land. But I don't believe it came out of chapter. If I remember correctly, it did not. But I could certainly be wrong on that.
what, the Cortland Circle piece?
Yes.
Yeah, Village at Flat Hill.
I mean, there's a house in between there that has like 2 lots. It's actually 3 lots. That doesn't matter. I mean, it's not contiguous. That the Cortlandt Circle property is not contiguous with that
Right.
Flat Hill property.
And that other property that abuts to the north I believe that did come out of chapter. And that was the one I think you're talking about, Lynn, that is divided into 2 or 3 lots fairly recently, right?
Right. But I'm just confused because I actually thought that they were the ones that were proposing to purchase the Flat Hill property with the idea of expanding a development or something in there. I guess, I don't know where I got that idea, but that's what I was thinking.
So Brandon, I'm happy to help, but you said to drive the bus. I don't even have my learner's permit on this stuff. So, so I'm not sure how much of a driver I can be. Mike, I don't know if you have more experience with dealing with land trusts, et cetera, that maybe between the 2 of us, we could manage it, or?
I do have a little bit, but it's a matter of time too, Paul. This is not a good time for me to be taking on, a time-consuming operation, which this could be.
Okay. Mike, Brandon, maybe you and I can talk offline and you can kind of outline what has to happen, and I can try. I mean,
I would be perfectly willing to help too, Paula. I mean, if you barely have your learner's permit, I'm like 5 years old. So, but I mean, I don't know if there's something I could do. I would be willing.
Yeah, I mean, principally, what I don't have what I'm discovering right now is I don't have the time right now to put this on my list of things to do. So if somebody else is making sure that we're progressing and that things are happening and that the next task is getting done and that things are getting scheduled, and then I can participate as somebody who shows up and plays ball and then goes home at the end of the day. So somebody who else is sort of doing the coordination and managing that part of the process, which I'm sure both of you can do in spades. So
Yeah, and I'm with you. I'll help out how I can, but I'm more in a position where I'm going to be pushing the bus, not driving it.
yep, exactly.
So maybe Brandon, if you could put together kind of an outline of what needs to happen, and then between Lynn and I, we can, and with Mike's assistance, and we can just try to facilitate that. But I need some kind of guidance on what the steps are.
Okay. So I guess then we would need to decide now whether or not we want to kind of continue to ask for time with the Board of Selectmen to continue to hold off on their right of first refusal decision at this point, and give us a little bit more time to run this to ground. I guess the flip side of that, of course, is I want to make sure that we're moving in a direction that will push us in a positive direction I don't want to waste anybody's time, I guess is what it comes down to.
So
Right.
I think that's the starting point. So you talked about a potential donor. The purchase price of the property is $600,000. And we talked about what kind of funds North County Land Trust could put towards this. I mean, did you have that level of discussion with North County Land Trust? Did you not? You mentioned a few minutes ago we'd have to come up with $500,000. I'm not sure what kind of donation we're looking at. I'm not sure.
So North County Land Trust would be a project facilitator when it comes down to it. Total amount of they're really not going to be bringing dollars to the table. What they may be able to bring to get to the table, and this is one of the things we'd want to explore straight away, is an ability to carry some sort of financing on the property for a short period of time. They may have relationships with local banks and other things that would allow them to be able to meet the 90-day closing, and then allow us to put the rest of the pieces of the puzzle together, assuming we have reasonable commitments for those things to come together. And that's really the role that North County Land Trust would ultimately play. They would play a fiduciary for any sort of charitable contributions, that kind of thing. But in terms of bringing, besides outside financing, in terms of them bringing dollars to the table that get left on the table, that's not their role, and is not likely going to be something that they can do in a real manner. If it's a matter of them, then flipping a lot or two off to help underwrite the underlying costs, that's something they can do. If it's a matter of them holding and then conveying an agricultural preservation restriction to the state, and getting those funds in and allowing the state process to run through its machinations, that's something they can do. So the idea of buying and holding, and then being able to spin these other pieces off as they do that with some advantageous financing that they can get through a relationship they may have with one of the local banks, that's perfect. And that's really as much as we can probably ask for them. And that may be more than they can do. And if that's the case, we have to walk away, because realistically, our ability to do anything is really contingent upon them being able to kind of pull those levers.
Well, and the more I hear about this, the more I'm thinking that the possibility of us putting something together is slim to none.
These are big, challenging projects like this, and that's why I'm in the bus seat right now and I'm pumping the brakes. So, to absolutely kill that analogy, but. I feel the same way you do. I'm really kind of conflicted over this in terms of, the project is a high quality project, and it's property that's worthy of conservation. That's number one. Number two, the fact that we have a donor who's willing to contribute a meaningful amount of money to this project gets us, really a significant way there. But there's still a lot of room that's left. $500,000 is not a short amount of change, and we'd have to come up with that.
I think about the last acquisition that went up off of Northfield Road, and that was pretty contentious at the town meeting, when they had to come up with, what was it, $700,000 for property that a lot of people didn't know anything about. And that property, I think, is even more valuable than the Flat Hill property, as much as I like I live near the Flat Hill property and I really like that area, but getting the town to buy into it, especially now, I think people are really undergoing a lot of financial hardships. I don't know, it might not be realistic. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the objective we've talked about, at least in our prior conversation about this, was not to be asking the town for a lot of money, if any, for this. Obviously, we don't have a town meeting planned anytime soon, and so again, this would have to be something that the North County Land Trust would have to carry for a period of time while we piece these things together.
I'm not understanding then. So if the North County Land Trust would not be able to leave any money on the table, they would only help to facilitate.
So imagine this, right? So imagine North County Land Trust acquires the property. They leverage charitable contribution that they get and some advantageous financing that they can get from a local bank. And that allows them to acquire the property and clear all the right of first refusal. They've met all of the obligations under the right of first refusal to acquire the property. Mm-hmm. Now North County Land Trust can then spin off portions of the property while maintaining their statutory obligation to protect a minimum amount of 70% of the property. They could spin off, say, 2 lots to a developer that would still allow us to preserve the agricultural portion of the property and get the income from those 2 lots. They could sell a conservation agricultural preservation restriction over the remainder of the property to the state, which would provide some funding. then they could sell the underlying ownership of that now conservation eased property, that agricultural preservation restricted property. They could then sell that to a local farmer who could continue to own and farm it and keep it on the property tax rolls. So you could protect 70% of the property. North County Land Trust at the end of the whole thing walks away without any ownership of it, and not out any capital. And we're able to protect 70% of the property. It remains in agriculture. It remains privately owned and on the tax rolls. And we've successfully funded a project that has happened at a conservation project at no cost to the taxpayer.
Wow, that is really complicated.
But it's complicated.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so, so if, you can do it. It's definitely, it's been done. I've done it. And we can, we could go down that path. It's just a matter of, can we go down the path and take all the steps that are necessary in the 120 days or whatever we have left here in the 120 days in the right of first refusal, and then the 90 days to close. So the town has the remainder of that 120 days to assign to a right to either exercise its right of first refusal or assign it to a nonprofit. If they assign it, then that triggers a 90-day period where the nonprofit would then have to close.
Okay, so if we were to, if North County Land Trust were to assist and to assign, we were to assign to them, what would they be looking for from the town of Lunenburg? I mean, would they be willing to take the risk of this through a financing option, or would Lunenburg have to share that risk? So we talked about selling off 2 lots and then potentially, obtaining funds from the state for an agricultural preservation restriction. Is North County Land Trust, would they be willing to assume that responsibility? And if that doesn't come to fruition, then where does that leave the town of Lunenburg?
What's the liability?
Right.
And that's where I think you have to have the project largely formed before they pull the trigger. So you have to know the answer to all those questions before that happens.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So it needs to be there. You need to de-risk it as much as you can, right? So you have to have all those preliminary conversations with all those potential project partners. Ideally you have an idea of who's going to buy those 2 lots before you have North County Land Trust actually close. You have to have an understanding of whether or not this is even a project that the APR program would consider and fund. You have to have an understanding of who the underlying buyer would be for the protected agricultural portion of the property. Those are pieces we don't have in place at this point. So
yeah, do we have like what's your sense of being able to find a buyer for the 2 lots? Like, how hard would that be?
I mean, I see Attorney Avini is on the phone now. I don't know if his buyer would be interested in staying on board for 2 lots instead of 6 or 7 or however many this was going to be. We could certainly pursue other local builders. The real estate market is still very, very hot in Lunenburg, and buildable lots are still selling reasonably easily. So it may not be that difficult to find a buyer for those 2 lots. It's hard to say.
Okay. You mentioned a sizable donation, and you haven't disclosed the amount. I know you don't want to disclose the individual, but can you disclose the amount?
I don't feel comfortable doing that in the context of this, just because with there being not enough there at this point. I don't want to.
Okay.
I don't want to necessarily do that, but.
Okay.
So I guess the last thing I would say is, the other thing I think about when I think about this is our relationship with the landowner.
Mm-hmm.
This landowner owns a substantial amount of other property that is also of strong conservation interest to the town. And you know, I wish we had had this conversation with that landowner before we got to the point where we're at. And unfortunately, we didn't. And I think this, I hope, offers us a springboard to have that conversation. And I'd rather have that conversation before there's a purchase and sale agreement in place with a potential residential developer, where we can have a more fulsome conversation about their interests in the future of their property, and try to come up with a solution that isn't under a 120-day timeline and isn't under the threat of development, and gives us a chance to have a creative conversation with them about the future outcome of the broader property. And what I wouldn't want to do is, in this process, drag them along for longer than we need to. If we don't have a project here, I'd rather say, look, we would love to be able to do something here, but we can't. In the meantime, we would really love to talk to you further about the rest of your property and see if there's a good conservation outcome that can come out of that, and cut bait here if we have to, in order to facilitate that broader conversation. And I see value in that, and I would, when I say I don't want to waste anybody's time, believe me, I appreciate all the time that everybody wants to put to this, but I also don't want to waste their time, because that relationship is important. And I hope they understand that as well. Mike or Karen, do you have anything else to add?
So where does that leave us? I mean, Paula, do you think this is something that we should pursue, maybe just even initially?
Honestly, I'm on the fence. I mean, I'm happy to make a couple calls to developers about potential lots. I'm happy to contact people about the APR program. I'm happy to talk to potential farmers. Obviously, my goal would be to have the existing farmer to have the farming rights. But that conversation is restricted due to the fact that they're under agreement. I'm happy to make some calls, but I share Brandon's concern that, is it even viable to get this done in the amount of time that we have?
Right. Do we have to decide right this minute, or can we take a few days to think about it? I know this is a public meeting and we can't be talking on the side, but I don't know if there's a way to, maybe think about it and do like a 15-minute meeting next week or something like that.
Well, we do have another meeting already on the books for December 15th.
That's too long, though.
I'm trying to think when the next Board of Selectmen meeting is. Because what I ultimately want to be able to do is I want to be able to communicate back to the Board of Selectmen what our recommendation is. So, I mean, we could conceivably, schedule another brief meeting with this being the only agenda item, I guess next week or the week after. But again, I don't have that in front of me.
Yeah, but next week, I mean, it's Thanksgiving week, so being able to get in touch with with anybody in that short a period of time, I think is not realistic.
Well, this is Thanksgiving week. I was thinking the week after.
Right. I mean,
you're saying because this is Thanksgiving week.
Because this is Thanksgiving week, you can't make a whole bunch of calls and get in contact with people.
Yeah, we're not buying a lot of time.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, we would need all of next week in order to make some calls. And the next selectmen's meeting is the 1st.
Oh, that's, yeah.
I mean, if our right of first refusal doesn't end until January, I mean, I'd like to at least give us 2 weeks to see if we can put anything together and potentially make some of these calls and possibly move up our meeting if possible. But, I'd like to take some of the time that we have just to see if we can even put together anything.
Well, here's the other thing too, is, it still would require work from Brendan, because you would have to put together a list, and you'd have to, I don't have enough knowledge to make calls and sound intelligent, like I know what I'm talking about. So I would need to come up to speed, in order to be able to make appropriate calls. And so we would probably have to rely on you, Brendan, to tell us who to call and, what the conditions are and what we would need to say and so forth.
Well, I'm happy to call a couple of developers. I mean, I worked for the Board of Health for many, many years and know a couple of developers that have worked in town. And I'm happy to make those calls to see what that interest would be in a couple of lots and what the potential value of those lots is. I'm also happy to call the state to find out, is this something that they would be interested in, and using the information that we have in our open space plan, using the information about the property that we've put together. I think we could at least gauge whether or not there's any interest. Did we just lose Karen?
Yeah.
Yeah, she had to drop off. I think she had some
Okay.
home needs.
It's 7:30.
Okay. So I don't know. I mean, what do people think? I'm happy to do that, but if people really think that we can't put anything together, then I think we need to let the selectmen know that. Or do we give ourselves a couple weeks to find out if we can at least get some gauge level of interest?
Mike, do you have any input on where you're feeling on this?
I'm really on the fence the way that the rest of you are, and I really take what you said to heart, Brandon. I think there's a bigger picture here too, in dealing with the current property owner on, much larger issues than this one parcel. But I don't know that it hurts us to give this till the 15th. Paul, did you say the next Board of Selectmen's meeting is the 1st?
Yes, they meet the Board of Selectmen meets every Tuesday except for the last Tuesday of the month.
Okay. So they would also be meeting on the 15th?
Yes.
So we wouldn't be back to them. If we did that, we wouldn't be back to them until Christmas. Right?
Right, unless we met earlier on the 15th, they meet at 7. If we met at, say, 5 on the 15th and then, jumped onto their meeting, we
Made a decision. Yeah, I think in fairness to them and to the property owner, we need to, fish or cut bait by the 15th.
Yep.
No, I definitely tend to agree with that. And I guess I'm questioning the viability of putting something together between now and the 15th. Certainly I can make calls to the buyers. I can make some calls to the state. I can reach out to North County Land Trust. But whether or not we'd be able to put something together in time with our timeline, I'm not sure. But certainly by the 15th, I'd be able to report back on what I've been able to find out and whether or not we even think it's a possibility. Brandon, you're thinking we need to just let it go. If I'm reading your facial expressions correct.
Yeah, you probably are. I'm, as much as it pains me to do that, I also, it's just, there's so many moving parts and just the nature of the calendar right now, with holidays and everything else being what they are, people's schedules being what they are. I share the interest, but I also don't want to, the broader relationship with the landowner is really valuable here, and this is one piece of a broader puzzle that I would, I wouldn't want to ruin the possibility of that relationship by, being too flippant in how we're handling this.
Okay.
So
I trust your knowledge and your intuition on this.
Okay, Mike, you were gonna chime in
I
there?
was just gonna say, as a halfway measure, I guess, is there a possibility of, giving up the town taking the right of first refusal, but turning around quickly and working with the property owner and potentially with the buyer of the property to see what could be preserved of that property in a conservation restriction. So give them, the development that they seek, but see if there aren't some parts of that property that could be preserved through a CR.
Certainly, we can explore that. There's not necessarily any leverage that we will have, and the buyer is putting in a substantial amount of capital of their own into this project. So we can certainly explore that, but they obviously are looking for a return on their investment.
No, understood, but there's a value to development. I imagine this is going to be a residential development. There is a value to developing residential properties that abut open space, that abut conservation lands, and that value comes through in the sale price of that property. You actually enhance the value of that property by providing, some common open space adjacent to the development parcels. So I don't know who's involved in this process. I don't know the developer, but I know there are developers that specifically will do this because it's good for them too.
Yep.
Is that, but that property isn't contiguous with other conservation areas, is it? Or, I mean, maybe it might not be that far from the property behind Cortlandt Circle, but I don't know, Mike. I'm sure you know more about it than I do, but I'm just wondering like how valuable it would be if it doesn't really go anywhere.
It doesn't connect. It connects. It's in close proximity to other chapter lands, but it doesn't, to my knowledge, it doesn't connect to conservation land.
And you remember the three criteria that we had identified were the agricultural values, the scenic values, with Flat Hill Road being a scenic designated road, and then it being within a designated noteworthy scenic area, statewide noteworthy scenic area, and then was the ACEC, it being in an ACEC. So it wasn't the direct connectivity that was a driver for us in this instance, but it were those other three criteria, right. And that's really why. Go ahead.
I was going to say correct, and that's kind of my point. I wasn't thinking of it in terms of public open space. I was thinking of it in terms of those other three criteria, and can we preserve aspects of those other three criteria, even though it isn't a quote public open space?
Well, and certainly, obviously it would be up to the donor, but maybe the donor would be interested still in some sort of lesser outcome that we could work out with the buyer, that isn't necessarily a 70% protection of the property, but maybe protects is one fewer lot out there, maybe the one that she would potentially be looking at, or a portion of the field that is particularly attributes to the scenic quality of the property. So protect the view shed as best we can, and so maybe there's some way to work with the buyer on that, and continue to leverage the generosity of that donor. So so certainly there are things to explore there. So I don't disagree with you, Mike, that there's a maybe something we can do there with the buyers. So it seems to me like we'd be looking for, based on this conversation, just to wrap it up here, it sounds like we're looking to have a motion to recommend the town just waive its right of first refusal, if I'm reading the tea leaves here right. Does somebody want to make that motion?
Yeah, that's what I was going to do, is I would make a motion that the town waive its right of first refusal for 360 Flat Hill Road.
Second that.
Okay, great. Any further discussion or conversation about that?
Do we have a quorum?
We do have a quorum. We have 4 members still
Yeah.
present.
I do have a little bit of discussion. It's not specifically about this motion, but so that we don't find ourselves in this situation again, I think it's important that this committee spend some time on knowledge sharing about some of the programs that you mentioned, so that we are prepared to step in and that it doesn't all fall on you.
Yep.
So rather than specific agenda items, I'd like to see more of a workshop atmosphere where we can find out more about the various programs that you think are beneficial, what those in and outs are, who the contact people are, what the process is, because then I think we would have our learner's permits and we would be able to help.
That's a great point, Paula. I think
I
that's
agree with that.
exactly- Yeah.
And I will appreciate everybody's effort to make that happen as well. You know, part of this is just making sure that, you know, we all have interest in various components of the agenda items that are coming up here, and sharing the workload is definitely much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally willing, but I'm completely incapable. Sorry.
Well, you definitely have the most experience, and so we're really looking for you to share some of that knowledge and even point us in the right directions about how you went about doing kind of an overview of some of the projects you've mentioned, projects you've been involved in. And if you can talk a little bit about how you put those pieces together and point, I mean, I'm happy to do research and I'm happy to, but we don't operate in this space.
Yeah.
So knowing what the process is and knowing the right people to contact and knowing how to do it, I think would go a long way in us being able to pick up some of the burden.
Yep, I agree.
Thank you.
So we have a motion on the table in a second. Roll call vote. Lynn,
Aye.
Paula,
Aye.
Mike,
Aye.
and I for myself. So I will put a summary email together and share this information with the board. I'll also correspond with the donor and have further conversation there. And Attorney Avini, if you're still listening, you know, I would be interested in having a follow-up conversation with you and your client as well, to see if there's anything we could do to try to leverage a conservation outcome with your buyer's interests in mind. So,
Hello, Mike, can you hear me?
yes.
Yeah, I listened to the whole meeting. I don't have any authority, folks, but I will talk to my client and I will talk to the seller's counsel. I mean, my line is I'd rather work with you than work against you. But again, I have no authority tonight to commit to anything.
Good. That's perfect. I think that's all we needed to hear. So,
Okay, thank you, folks. Have a great night.
yeah, I appreciate it. You as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Bye-bye.
Mike, were you going to say something?
I'm all set.
Okay. All right. Left on the agenda here is review the town-owned property list and then public comment. I have to be honest, I haven't really had much opportunity to go through the town-owned property list. Paul and I traded a couple of texts earlier, and it sounds like she was also behind the 8 ball on that as well.
I looked at it about an hour ago.
So I'm going to recommend that we table that portion of the conversation to the next meeting because I don't feel like we're prepared to talk about it.
Brandon, can I chime in just for a second?
Yes, please do.
I did have a little bit of time to go through it and not to have a discussion about it tonight, but there are a couple of properties on the list that I just wanted to point out for people to look at. There's a property, and I don't know whether it's better to give the street address or to give the assessor's address is what I have in this
The street address.
list, the street address. So Fire Road 12 off Reservoir Road, it's actually map 137, parcel 12.
How do we?
There's a parcel that runs all along, and I know the area because I live near here. It's an area that runs along Lake Shirley at Fire Road 12. So we were talking previously about Parmenter Road, about the little parcel on Parmenter Road.
Yep.
This is another parcel down there that has access to Lake Shirley. And it's listed on Town General Municipal right now. So if people would take a look at that one.
Mhm.
There are a couple of parcels. There's one at 380 West Street. Paul, it wasn't on the original list that you sent me. I didn't look at the list you sent me today, but the original list, it wasn't on there, but it was on the list that Brandon had sent me before.
I have to be honest with you, I've received 3 different lists from the assessors and they're all different. So.
Yeah, they're all a little different. So this is 380 West Street. It is adjacent to conservation restriction land off Hollis, is my note on that one. So if you would take a look at that, it's a 3.5 acre parcel. There's another parcel that's a 3.6 acre parcel, 1162 Mass Ave, and a 3.7 acre parcel at 247 Highland. That one there's some wetlands on it, but it's not adjacent to existing open space. So just real quick, I don't want to take up a lot of time, but there were just a few that kind of stuck out at me. One more is 690 Goodrich Rear. It's a 3.6 acre parcel. And my question there is, I think that one, it looks like it should have been a conservation restriction because the 690 was developed and 690 Rear was not. But it was on the tax title. So those are just 4 or 5 parcels that jumped out at me on this list.
And 860 Reservoir Road jumped out at me. So if people could take a look at that.
One?
860 Reservoir Road.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that also lakeshore frontage?
Yeah.
Oh, it might.
I put my kayak in there.
I found these properties really hard to find because obviously they're not marked with numbers. And like you said, Mike, the ones in the rear, like you can't even get to it. I pulled up somebody's driveway and I'm like, I don't think I should do this.
Yeah.
So it's really like you can't look at. The only one I was really able to look at was one on Parmenter Road, which was really cool. But the other ones I couldn't really get. Even the 380 West Street, like you can kind of drive by it and see it from the road, but you can't get into it at all.
Yeah, the one on Fire Road 12 is real interesting because it comes up against Reservoir Road and then it goes out to Fire Road 12. So it's a whole arc that runs along Reservoir out to Fire Road 12. And I know the area is a wetland down there. I watch people down there too. But there's access to the lake down there, at least when the lake is full. Right now, there's no access anywhere down there.
Yeah, right.
And the other one that I thought was interesting, it's 0 Flynn Road, and it's actually 2 pieces.
0 Flynn Road.
0 Flynn Road, yeah. They're small, but they're lake access.
And Karen mentioned Flynn and Parmenter parcels as well.
Yeah, I like the Parmenter one, that little pie-shaped one.
Yeah. Yep. So.
Well, good. So we have some starting point. So
Okay. I mean, we're almost done.
yeah.
Well, okay, so can I ask a question? I wasn't really sure how to look at this Excel sheet. So like, what does vacant/selectmen mean or improved? So I don't know what these things mean.
So this is where I think the list we we have to kind of compare the current assessment with the list we put together in the open space plan, because that list was really, we spent a little bit more time thinking about it. And that's a refinement of what we had gotten from the assessor at that time. So, I think in any case, all of these are only starting points. The assessor's data is not perfect. And
Are we supposed to look at all these properties here and like, or anything that's not
I
designated?
mean, the way I'm going to do it when I finally do it, because when we did put the open space plan together, you know, this is, you know, we put these together and we put them together on a map. And so my first step is somebody who's graphical like that anyway, that's just how my thick brain works, is I want to see them on a map first. I want to see how they fit in the landscape first. And so whether or not they have resources on them, look at the aerial photograph, zoom in on them, you know, have an understanding of the lay of the land. And then, you know, the way I want to think about it is I want to think about it, A, does it have conservation value for ownership of conservation, you know, ownership, care and control of Conservation Commission? Is there a good reason for that? Is there good reason for it to potentially be under the care and control of the Parks Commission? You know, the Parmenter Road one might be a good example of a, you know, Parks Commission public access point or whatever. And then are there any other municipal uses that sort of jump off the page? They're clearly obvious, you know, other potential municipal uses, Cemetery Commission. And I mean, this is what some of the things I think about, you know, and again, going back to our earlier conversation about people taking things and running with them, you know, is somebody want to kind of take the point on this project, and you know, when we have our compiled list, reach out to the Cemetery Commission and say, hey, are you guys looking for, you know, any more land? Are there need? Have you identified any needs that you have that we could look at what we have on our existing list of properties that we could address some of those?
So my thought is, once we go through this and we have our preliminary discussions, is maybe we can divide the workload, and somebody's going to reach out to the conservation, somebody's going to reach out to cemetery, somebody's going to, and I think that we're all more than willing to do that. But I think the question that Lynn, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if we look at the state use code for the properties, and I actually went on the website trying to find out what the use codes were and didn't make any headway. But improved selectmen, we're not concerned about those, the 931, but the improved tax titles we potentially are. Or are we? What are we concerned about? I guess that's the question.
That is my question, because I was looking, I thought we were supposed to be looking at, you know, who are they under the care and control of right now? And if it says, if it's designated, great, we just leave it. But if it's not designated, but most of them are designated. So I'm very confused.
Yeah, so general municipal land is land that's under the selectmen's control.
Okay.
What about vacant tax title is also something we would be concerned about.
Right. Yep.
So vacant tax title, 936. Vacant selectmen, which is 930. And potentially, now conservation is conservation. We're not concerned about that. So vacant conservation, which is a 932, we're not necessarily concerned about.
Is that right? Okay.
And other, and some of the properties that I'm interested in are definitely listed as others. Those are all owners unknown. So they're under the Lunenburg town of, but they're just listed as other, which is 997. So should we be looking at those?
To a degree, yes.
Yeah, okay. So two of those just turned over to, well, at least one of them, the 111 rear Melpus Road, we just suggested to the selectmen that they turn over to conservation.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So those are listed as others. Now, things that are listed as improved education, the majority of those are developed and in use by the school. So obviously, we're not going to be concerned about those.
And I think Bob was mentioning that there was something. There were some of them that had land use codes that didn't make any sense. That said that it was vacant and it wasn't vacant, or the other way around. So.
Right, and that's what I was running into. So I think really looking at the address and determining whether or not it's a building in use is the key component, or a use that's already, you know, current. Then I think we can skip those. But things like, for example, I don't know what town, what district means, vacant / district. I don't know what that means. It's
I don't
Lunenburg town of, and it's, 60 Page Street, 52 Holman Street, and the use is vacant district. I have no idea what that means.
So this is what I'm going to suggest, that you pay zero attention to that column C.
Okay,
And I just sent in the group chat there a link to the Department of Revenue's land use codes,
okay,
classification codes. And so that state use code column corresponds to the codes that are listed in that worksheet or index or whatever. So you'll see 930 shows up as vacant, comma, selectmen or city council. 931 is improved, comma, selectmen or city council. 932 is vacant, conservation, so on and so forth. So I think that's where they're coming up with these lists, or this column C, I should say. But those state use codes are really the sort of the driver there. So somebody had to have, looked at the parcel and said, oh, that fits 930. So somebody made that decision. Whether it's right or not is another question altogether. It could be that, well, it's always been 932 for the last 30 years, and who knows, maybe it was a decision by a prior town meeting that's set it aside to something else. Maybe it was, it's in the deed as something else entirely. So, there's this effort is the first part of an effort that would have several steps along the way to confirm what the current status is, and then ultimately convey it to something else, if that made sense. So, so this first, I caution you to consider this list being A, complete, and B, perfectly accurate. It's probably neither of those things,
okay.
but it's a place to start.
It's a starting point. Okay.
Yep.
Can I, so one more question. How does column H then relate to column C? And do we need to put those together when we're looking at this in any way?
I just made the mistake of closing that, so I'm sorry.
Well, column H is owner name, and it has like, the first one is Board of Selectmen, and then the next one is just Selectmen, the next one is blank. They've got road on there, they've got landfill, highway department, park department, different things, conservation commission, conservation land, conservation, nothing else after it. It's very, very confusing.
Well, again, this is a database that has been compiled and changed and everything over many years. So I would say that, again, there's somebody went in there and typed in conservation land for a reason. We don't necessarily know what that reason was or how long ago that was.
So should we ignore that column then and just work off of column C?
I think we have to appreciate it for what it is, which is a starting point. And it could be that, and I know myself, I mean, when I've gone through I've actually gone and collected all of the deeds for town conservation land, and as many of them as I could come up with. And I've got, this big old database of, and every one of the town parcels that are owned as care and control of the Conservation Commission say Town of Lunenburg, comma, care and control of the Conservation Commission, comma, subject to Chapter 40, Section 8C, Mass General Laws, blah, 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 blah.
Can you share that? Because then we can compare that to this.
Yeah, so, but the problem is we don't necessarily, the town's data is not, for their deeds, is not all right. That's why that list, by the spreadsheet that I have in the open space plan has, if you expand all the columns there, which it actually has all the deed references and everything in there. So I'll share that with you, and that's where it all is.
Right, yeah.
So that's part of that, you know, first, this data is sort of the first cut, and then you have to kind of keep peeling back layers of the onion until you get to where the actual truth is in terms of the ultimate ownership of it.
Oh,
But I think the first step is, okay, we have some idea of where these general municipal ones are. There's not, we just listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 parcels out of that whole list that are of, you know, kind of jump off the page, immediate interest. Okay, that's a great start.
Right, I went through all of the ones that I thought, and I looked through all of them, and honestly, the majority of them, I missed some because I went just general municipal, but I think that's a good point. I think a lot of them are going to be, it makes sense for the abutters, or it makes sense for the town to look at offloading or putting back on the tax rolls. But I think that there are some that are gonna jump out at us. But I thought, just to clarify what you said, Brandon, I thought you said ignore column C and go by column B.
That's what I would do.
Yeah, so
That's
don't
what I will do. And
column B.
yep.
Oh, it's
And you-
column B we're supposed to be looking at?
Yeah, so compare column B to the classification codes on that link that I just sent you.
Yeah, he sent a link in the chat.
Okay. I ran out of space here.
If you just open that link and bookmark it, that way you'll have it,
Okay,
which is what I just did so that I don't lose it.
okay, hold on a second. Why is it not opening?
But if it's conservation land,
Okay, got it.
is conservation land, we're not necessarily gonna do a lot of investigation into that.
Right, I wouldn't, it's,
It's already a designated use and it's already protected.
and can't be changed.
It can't be changed.
Very easily.
And that's to the legislator, yeah, legislature.
Okay.
So much for tabling this conversation.
Sorry.
Conversation next meeting. When we get to public comment, I do have a question.
Okay,
Okay, just one last thing. Karen and I were sort of chatting on the side, and we're going to try to catch up next week. So I'll try to catch her up on the because I asked her about this earlier today and she wasn't available. And so I'll catch her up on what I've learned just now.
great.
Okay. All right.
Anything further on this? Okay, good. Well, we'll keep it on the agenda and let's just try to, you know, kind of keep plugging away on it. Again, I mean, we could try to be as comprehensive in this as, you know, in terms of inclusiveness as we wanted to be. If we find we don't get much traction with other boards and commissions, then, you know, ultimately we should be looking at these from an open space and recreation perspective, and call it a day from there. So make our recommendations based on that. So, all right. All right, good. Public comment then?
250 Howard Street, where are we?
Yes. We have,
Just,
the Board of Selectmen signed the agreement with the tri-party agreement with the buyers and the sellers,
yeah,
and which gives us which commits the buyer to conveying the town the piece that they said they would. The town waived its right of first refusal in order to allow that transaction to proceed. And in that tri-party agreement, the landowner also signed, so that if things go sideways with the deal between the landowner and the buyer, that the right of first refusal would be back in place. So all that's fully protected and everything's moving ahead. At special town meeting, the town voted to approve the acquisition as presented by the buyers, the donation, and proved and passed over the exercising of the right of first refusal as we had discussed. so it's all on track. I talked with the buyer late last week, and he's already got his surveyor out there putting the plan of land together and everything for the conveyance to the town. He had a question about one of the monuments is in a stone wall, and he had committed to granite monuments on all the corners, but a drill hole on that one corner certainly makes perfectly good sense. And I told him that would work from our perspective.
It may
So
work from a planning board perspective, just an FYI.
say that again.
It may not work from a planning board perspective, so just an FYI.
A drill hole in a stone wall doesn't work as a monument?
I would have him, it may, but I would have him confirm that with Adam Burney.
Okay, because that is certainly a standard conveyance monument for,
It makes sense to me. I'm just pointing out, we require monuments, so he may just want to check that with Adam.
and they don't count drill holes as monuments?
I've only been on for a short period of
Okay,
time. I will
okay,
confirm that, but-
okay. And so from a surveying perspective, drill holes are considered a monument.
Okay.
So, so I would be hard pressed to think that,
Fine. Okay,
that the planning board wouldn't, yeah.
okay.
Mike, do you have any input on that as well?
I've had planning boards, other planning boards not accept them because you can move parts of the wall. I mean, that was their reasoning.
Okay. All right.
You know, does it really make sense from a surveying perspective? No, but that was their reasoning.
Paul, will you check with Adam then and just,
Check with Adam, yep.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I was unaware that the planning board might have, I've never had any issue with drill holes before, so.
I think there might be an issue. So let me check with him. And if there are, just shoot that to you because I don't have the buyer's information or.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Did I answer all your questions on that?
You did.
Okay. Any other public comment?
Yeah, this is Chris. Can you hear me?
Yep, sure can. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so one thing I was thinking through that whole 61A withdrawal and seeing all the flurry of activity that happens on all of these 61A withdrawals is perhaps we take a more proactive approach to this and set up stabilization funds or something to that effect, where we can actually purchase a property like this, spend the time how we might want to lay it out. And if we choose to do nothing, you know, we're still sitting on a $600,000 property that could be sold. And perhaps we could sell it in such a way that it's further subdivided so that we get roads where we want and in parcels where we want and all that kind of thing. So just something to think, if there's a way of doing that going forward.
I think it's a really good point. You know, I think we've talked about it. I think it might even actually be, if I remember right, let me pull it up. I think we have a piece in our open space plan that talks about, you know, essentially dedicated funding for acquisition dollars. I know we mentioned the Community Preservation Act in the past and having that passed as a dedicated funding source. But I believe we have in there having it part of the regular capital plan as well. But let me just open that up and see. Sorry, this will take a second.
I guess the hard part with the capital plan is that these things pop up, you have 120 days to do it. You can't get it through the capital planning process.
Well, except that, you know, like you're saying, right, if I'm understanding you right, is we have a dedicated fund that we contribute capital to on a regular basis, sort of like what they call it, the special use stabilization fund we were talking about at special town meeting.
Yeah, we have like special stabilization funds for like, you know, expensive fire engines or something like that. So something comparable to that might be a way of doing it. I don't know if you can or not, but it might be something we look at doing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting idea. And if that's something, you know, the finance committee would want to pick up and take up and explore a little bit to see what it would be. But I mean, if we put $20,000 a year into, or, you know, $25,000 a year or something into a fund like this to allow us to build up some capital, because these are ultimately, you know, conservation projects are capital projects. These are capital investments. And if we have money in the bank that would still require town meeting to spend it, right? We would still have to authorize individual acquisitions to actually expend those funds out of those stabilization accounts. I think that's the right way to do it. Now, why we wouldn't pass the Community Preservation Act or try to pursue passing the Community Preservation Act and take the monies that we put into those funds and match them with outside state dollars to make a bigger pot of money, you know, to me, that is really where the magic happens in terms of being able to leverage our dollars, our municipal dollars even further. But I think the Community Preservation Act has been tried and defeated on 3 different occasions. So it's
Yeah.
it's a you know, it's a tough nut, but I don't disagree, Chris, that having some funds set aside makes a lot of sense.
It is in the plan. It's section 6B4, and it says on page 63, and it talks about diversifying funding sources. It says creating a dedicated funding source such as passage of the Community Preservation Act would also be an important step to make the town able to be more proactive in meeting its open space and recreation goals. Having conservation and recreation at the table for long-term capital planning is also fiscally responsible, because these are capital assets that lend tremendous value to the quality of life in town. So we've already brought it up, but the question is, have we brought it forward more than that? That's the key, is can we get buy-in from the Finance Committee? Can we get buy-in from the Capital Planning Committee?
And this from section 9, which is the 7-year action plan. Here you see integrate open space and recreation needs into the capital plan, pass the Community Preservation Act, apply for state grants, and utilize dedicated and trust funds. So, you know, Chris, if this is something that you want to explore with the Finance Committee, I think, you know, the open space plan itself offers a good jumping off point for that conversation to at least start exploring it. And if you know, you would like to have the Open Space Committee come in and talk about any of these items, we can certainly accommodate that as well. Because I don't disagree with you. I think it's great. So I would love to further that ball. And if nothing comes of it, fine. At least we had a chance to explore it.
Yep, no, I can bring it up at one of the next FinCom meetings, for sure.
Okay.
And I'll bring it up at the next capital planning meeting.
Great. Awesome. I think that's excellent.
Great. That's all I
Good.
had.
Thanks for that. And the only other thing I would have in public comment is to remind people that we have a meeting scheduled for December, our next meeting scheduled for December 15th at 6 p.m. So any further public comment or comment from the committee?
Can we talk about having the Brandon workshop perhaps in January?
Oh, the brain dump?
The brain dump, yeah.
Well, what I would suggest is get me. I'm happy to do it, and maybe the thing to do is we can compile a list of topics that we're interested in learning more about. Maybe we could add, you know, sort of an education topic to each of our agendas, and we focus on one thing at a time. Maybe I'm leading that, maybe I'm not necessarily on all of them. Maybe we can get people come in from outside organizations that have, you know, technical expertise on certain aspects of things that we could leverage. I mean, I would love to have that, like kind of like Al coming in tonight and talking about Forest Legacy. You know, there's other opportunities to have other people come in and just share some knowledge. So
Yeah,
I think that's a great idea.
Right.
and I'm happy to reach out to a couple different grant programs and see if they're willing to come in. Maybe we can reach out to North County Land Trust, reach out to a couple of the, maybe even someone from the park grant I think that would be helpful to see, to at least find out what their availability and have them come in.
Yep, I agree. And I also think, I think there's an opportunity here in the conversations that we have in this forum and in this venue are being watched by other people out there in the community. They're either interested in open space and conservation, or maybe are property owners themselves and would like to understand what their options are for conserving their property. Many people don't really have a full understanding of what their options are and would just like the opportunity to learn about that. And so, being able to have those conversations in this forum gives us the opportunity to touch those people with that information, and otherwise to be able to have it recorded so that, if we have future conversations, we can go back to them and say, yeah, oh yeah, you should see, we have this piece, at this meeting. So I think that's a good idea, a really good idea.
Yeah.
So are these meetings, are the open space meetings put up on YouTube?
Yes.
They are. Okay, great. So they'd be available. So if we had people come in and do that kind of program, we could point people to those programs. That would be fantastic.
Yep, for sure. And there are, periodically there are other, there's a couple of really great resources that I turn to on a regular basis, and I'll tell you about those just quickly here. One is the Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition. That is an umbrella organization that provides technical resources and information to the land trust community. So there tends to be a clearinghouse of information available there for a whole host of topics where you can learn about. That's number one. Number two is UMass Extension has, I think it's called masswoods.net, I want to say. Let me quickly look that up. Masswoods.net. Yep, masswoods.net. It's UMass Extension, and there is they have conservation tools and information, deciding the future of my land. There's videos and resources on there for landowners. This is all principally landowner focused. There's caring for your land, information about your woods, stewardship options, and timber harvesting. There's information about Chapter 61 programs. There's a whole list of fantastic, they've put together all kinds of really wonderful publications that really summarize some really dense topic information in very digestible ways. So I go to the Mass Woods a lot for a lot of resources. So mostly because they've already figured out how to make it digestible. So I would start with a couple of those resources to both for your own edification and education, but also to share with others if you have reason to.
Absolutely on board with that. I think it's a great idea. I also think, when we talk about, quote, the brain dump, my thought is, if you can highlight a couple of projects that you've worked on, for example, I know you were absolutely instrumental in the acquisition of the Lane property. Talking about some of the projects you've worked where you've worked with a land trust in order to preserve land, but at the same time maintain the agricultural component. Understanding how to put all those pieces together, I think is really important. Is that's what we need to know is what are the steps so that we can follow them, because learning about specific projects is great and specific organizations, but if we don't know what all the steps are and what we have to, that's where I think we're really lacking.
Yeah, and I would say that our ability as a committee to pull those complicated projects off is going to be limited by the fact that we all have other day jobs, and so working with, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of conservation organizations that are going to have an interest within the boundaries of Lunenburg. We've got North County Land Trust, and that's about it. The state of Massachusetts, from a state agency standpoint, it's going to be hard. There's not a lot of land that abuts existing Department of Conservation and Recreation lands. We have the lands up in the northwest corner of town where a portion of Willard Brook, or is that Pearl Hills State Forest, whatever it is, we've got a little bit of DCR owned land in the northwest corner of town. We've got a little bit of Fish and Wildlife, Mass Wildlife land in the northeast corner of town up by Hunting Hills. And those two agencies' interests are going to be hyper interested in only those two areas. That's it. Statewide organizations like Mass Audubon, we're not going to have any luck getting them here because they don't have an existing ownership base, and they don't have, we don't fall within any of their priority areas.
Okay.
Same with the trustees of reservations. Luckily, I mean, with the trustees of reservations, they hold a conservation easement over Brockman's property. Sorry. Yep. So they do have a presence in town, but it's limited to that. I know they don't have any priority areas in town. They don't have any, so unless there was sort of a outstanding donation opportunity that they could, bring their resources to bear, I don't think we're going to have, if somebody wants to donate property, I don't think we're going to have a problem handling that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when it comes to putting a complicated project together and having somebody leverage their capabilities, we have the resources that we've been able to leverage to date successfully, which is the land grant program and the park grant program. And then we've got the capabilities of the North County Land Trust. So if there's one thing we should probably do sooner than later is enhance our relationship with the North County Land Trust. I would say, invite them and have a more fulsome conversation with them about how we can work together. They do have a presence in town, and their region is really hyper focused on a dozen towns or whatever it is. And so we're one of them. And so we should make sure that we utilize that and explore that relationship and expand it. And if we can have some good partnerships with them, then when the really complicated, good partnerships on the easy stuff, so that when the complicated project comes along, we know what their capabilities are really well.
Then we have a relationship. Yeah.
And we have a relationship with them. So, that's every time I think about this, I think North County Land Trust is where we have, we can make our most hay. And I shouldn't discount the Nashua River Watershed Association either. I mean, obviously they have strong capabilities there as well. They're just not a land owning organization, so they can bring resources to bear, like was discussed this evening, but ultimately they wouldn't necessarily be a conservation easement holder or a property owner in a conservation outcome. So that's where North County would and does, and that's sort of a different role that they can play. Anyway, it's 8:23. I'm exhausted.
Long meeting.
So I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? Okay, all those in favor, Lynn,
Aye.
Paula,
Aye.
Mike,
Aye.
and I for myself. Thank you all for a productive meeting.
Thank you.
We'll talk on the 15th.
Have a great Thanksgiving, everyone.
Yeah, likewise. Enjoy the holiday.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.